Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we are good to go. May I have your attention, please? Yes, yeah, I think the tech desk also says we're good to go. Good afternoon on this auspicious occasion. My name is Hector Katurura. For what it's worth, my role in this university at the moment is that I'm Deputy Registrar responsible for academic administration. I'll be your program director for today. I've deliberately dressed the way I have today in my alumni colors. Part of the reason is I want to declare an association with the person in whose honor this lecture is being given. As you shall hear shortly, he is part of a great pantheon of alumni that have come through this university. So I put on my blazer to just make it very clear that I'm part of that, that pantheon of which this luminary, in whose honor this lecture is going to be delivered, is right at the head of it. So I am, for that reason, therefore, very excited and feel quite privileged that I was asked to be program director for today. If I may take this moment to greet
family to Z.K. Matthews. He was the first black professor at the University of Fort Hare. Another thing, he was the first Senate chairperson of the university. These are all the accolades that are actually putting us together at this very late hour of the year. It was not actually by mistake that we decided to do this one. So we are here for that. So I just want to welcome all of you colleagues and then to rush to what I was actually supposed to do to give you a synopsis of the purpose for the day. Ladies and gentlemen, the core of this talk is on inclusive education. Just want to actually take you through, or some of you who may not be familiar of what is it that we mean by inclusive education. So what is inclusive education? It's very, very important to actually link it
to other countries. That's just about all the countries on the globe in 2015 and agreed on the Agenda 2030. You all know this, right? Not so new. And you know what all the goals are, all 17 of them. I don't remember them all the time, but they're there. But this was because South Africa also felt that sustainable development was one way for helping the world and its own country to advance into a more just and sustainable future. Checking on things here. I'll go on while you're fiddling. You know, there are historians and sociologists who claim that humanity is moving from a collective youth to a more advanced stage of maturity. Have you seen this picture? I don't know if I can't point, but the young boy with the white, I don't know how your ceremonies for becoming mature and becoming of age are, but I lived in Uganda, and in part of Uganda, this is how they celebrate the boys before they're circumcised. They get covered in white dust and are dressed like this, just to show us that if we think of the whole global community, that we've reached a stage where we can't keep on acting like teenagers. There's some of you who are still young, and some of you who maybe have had teenagers at home. I can guarantee having youngsters who become mature is not always an easy process. And it takes time and it can be traumatic, but it is a process of change. And this is what we're talking about. Here we go. When we're talking about sustainable development, when we're talking about Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and thus about education. Because the Sustainable Development Goals were not thought of as a continuation of the Millennium Development Goals. You've heard about those, right? The Millennium Development Goals, they were suggested by the Secretary General of the United Nations, a decree from top down. The Sustainable Development Goals came after 10 years of collaboration, of input from people like you. I don't know how many of you were involved in that process. Perhaps some of you were. Did you know that everyone here who was alive and kicking in 2015 or 2012, 2010 could have contributed to the Sustainable Development Goals? Did any of you do that? Did you know that you could contribute? It was a campaign that the United Nations sent out to people all around the world. But even our Minister of Education, when I asked him, did you contribute? Did you suggest content to the Sustainable Development Goals? He looked at me and he said, oh, I thought it was spam. I deleted it. But a lot of people did contribute. And the reason I have this upside down eternity sign is to show that what has now been taking place around the globe has not been leaders just saying, hey guys, you have to do this, do this. It's been a process of the grassroots contributing, communities, practitioners, scholars, academicians, giving in ideas that then the leaders have been working, negotiating on, passing back down, and you have this continual flow. There are problems, there are compromises, there's negotiations, not everything works, but at least it's a change from what we've had before. You mentioned the Freedom Charter for South Africa and C.K. Matthews' role in both suggesting and working on the development of it. Here, we'll go back a moment here. The Freedom Charter, from what I understand and having tried to do my homework and read and understand and learn about it, was a combination of general ambitions, very ambitious goals, and practical suggestions for South Africa. Agenda 2030 is also that. The Sustainable Development Goals talk about the society we need for the future. How do we achieve justice? How do we achieve climate justice? How do we achieve inequality, remove inequality? But it also gives very concrete goals. You know, it has targets. It says we need to have so and so many kids in university. We need to have so and so many women in university. We need to have so and so much research, etc. But basically, what it tells, and if you read, and you've heard me tell you that you have homework before, but may I give you homework? So when you go back, you have to go home, or on your way back, you can look on your phone. Transforming our world is the equivalent of the South African Freedom Charter, but it was for the whole world. This is the foundation document for Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And it says basically that sustainable development requires readdressing what we value, what is human development, and how we define equality and the quality of life. No big deal, huh? But that means that all of you, students, teachers, families, friends, need to think about these things a lot. You know, you sit down for dinner table, you don't usually talk about quality of life or what you value, but these issues are important and are the basis of the Sustainable Development Goals. And they are there so that we can promote collaboration. The Sustainable Development Goals are a roadmap, but they're not a recipe. You know the difference? I mean, a recipe says you put a little of this and a little of that, and you mix it up and you get your cake, or you get your pie, or your stew. The Sustainable Development Goals are suggestions about how we can move forward, but it is basic that we move forward in our own way. You know, we do the South African way, we do the Norwegian way, we do different ways, but we're all moving to the same goal. And I came across this sign when I was traveling recently in northern Uganda, and I liked it. It was a new road, it wasn't finished, full of, you know, holes and stones and all. And I wondered, what do they mean? I know we're going in the direction of Pakwachingulu, Yes, I want to get there, but it doesn't tell me how long it will take to get there. It doesn't tell me how many kilometers I have to go. And that's the same thing with sustainable development and inclusive quality education. We know we have to get there. It may be we have to take detours, we may have to backtrack, we may have to admit that some of the things we've tried don't work, but we do have to keep on moving in that direction and trying to get on with the task. Unfortunately, we're doing a pretty bad job of it. In September, the United Nations held a summit to sort of measure up, to see how are we doing? Are we going in the right direction? Are we getting there? Have we fallen off the cliff on a side road? And as you sort of can see here, we're doing worse than we were before COVID. We're doing good in some areas, but even then, when you're talking about primary school enrollment, even in South Africa, but also in the majority of Africa south of the Sahara, you have an enormous problem of literacy poverty. Have you heard that phrase before? You know what food poverty and poverty in general is, but literacy poverty is about the kids who go to school, but they don't learn. They don't learn to read and write. And this is a big problem all around the world, but specifically in Africa. And then you have areas in which we're moving backwards. And if any of you have followed the COP28, you will have heard that they are very distressed because we are not moving forward in terms of many areas. I can greet you and say Norway has decided to keep on pumping oil and pushing fossil fuels, and even though they're doing many other good things. So there are many countries who are saying, these goals, they were just, sort of ideas, hopes. But they weren't, they were commitments, actually. The reason we haven't moved forward is because there are a lot of stumbling blocks. There are things that we haven't been able to overcome. And I've just listed 3 here. We could talk for hours about it. But of course, one is a lack of knowledge-based ethical thinking. This realization that actually what we do here in South Africa affects what happens in Norway, it affects what happens in Colombia, it affects every part of the world. The other part is this fragmentation of responsibility. I understand you're going to have elections soon, right? Next year? I also understand people have already started the campaigning, because I was listening to the news the other day and people were pointing fingers. We're great at doing that in Norway. We had elections recently and the one party said, no, you didn't do that and you didn't do that. But coming together and finding ways of collaborating to really share the responsibilities we have is something that all governments are struggling with and that we need to work more on. But most of all, we have this problem of personal and social prejudices, these habits and fears that keep us from thinking about new ways, alternative ways of being, and of the importance of unity in diversity. So, what does all this have to do with inclusive quality education? I don't know how many of you are teachers. I assume some of you are parents. But what people all over the world, practitioners, teachers, students, politicians, all kinds of people, they're saying, we don't like the education that we've been given before. We need a new social contract for education. And this social contract has to be different from the education we've been through before. I don't know what you all think. I mean, we're proud to have been educated. We're very pleased to have been here. We respect and honor people like Z.K. Matthews, who have achieved a high degree of knowledge and are able to share that. But the way we teach, the way we learn has to change. And the key word that has come up all around the world has been transformative education. I'm pretty critical sometimes, and I tend to say, transform into what? Hitler talked about transformative education. Mao Zedong was very into transformative education. What are we transforming into? Well, I put up a list there. Don't worry about reading it all. But this list is just a general review of some of the theoreticians, the people who have researched about transformative education. And I'll mention two small aspects of this here. Many of the theories of transformative education have been about transforming oneself, opening one's minds, sort of saying, aha, I didn't know that could be thought of that way. Oh, did you really mean that this is what, I should think? Or understanding things from different perspectives. And sometimes that's rough because you have to throw out things that you don't like or you used to think was the way the world was put together. It's only recently, in the last decade, that we've begun to have transformative education that looks at how we can transform what we learn in order to serve each other and to tend the planet. In other words, transformative education that affects society and not just ourselves. And in doing that, I'd like to go a little bit further and just show you, I've worked a lot on new theories. You don't have to be too concerned about understanding this slide, but it just gives you a little bit of processes. And of course, you have to wonder if you want to learn. I mean, no kid is going to learn if you just beat things into their head. They have to sort of say, hey, why? Why does that happen? What makes the stars shine? Why does the sun come up? They need to wander. In Australia, they have walkabouts, where you go out and I think perhaps in some of your cultures as well, learning from wandering, from asking questions. But in transformative education, they focus also on the daring part, that you dare to put aside old thoughts, but they don't focus too much on the caring. And that's what I'd like us to look at for a moment. The other things, curiosity, creativity, language, ethics, these are all catalysts. And then you have somebody's trying to get in, but they're not allowed to. Then you have the contents. But the outcomes, I think, that this new kind of education should be, is going to be not only, let's go back here. Not only knowing, but it's about sharing and serving. What's caring? You all care for your moms and dads, don't you? Or your grandfathers, or your husbands and wives. Caring in this context is more than just altruism or sympathy or empathy. It involves thinking about the purpose of life for yourself, but also for the rest of society. And listening attentively, but it requires that you're not indifferent. We got a new curriculum in Norway for all of our schools recently. And that curriculum said you have to be tolerant. You have to be tolerant to people who are different than you are. What does that mean? Okay, I can tolerate you. Just stay over there. Don't share your ideas. I don't want to be a part, but I tolerate you. This is something different. If you care, you want to understand, to be a part of, and really have a closer connection. And it involves elements of passion and concern. I could go on and on about that, but I won't, because we have to think about other aspects and perhaps a little bit more practical. These are learning processes that are being asked for that help people re-examine what it means to be human and what helps us achieve dignity, well-being, and contentment. I was a part of all these 10 years of programs, the Commission on Sustainable Development, that led up to the SDGs. And it was exciting. But, when people from Africa came and talked about well-being and what it means to have a good life, it was quite different than the people from Latin America or Asia. And understanding how we define this has been a very exciting process. But also to recognize our injustices, face our fears, cope with ambiguity. Things aren't so simple. A lot of things are really cloudy. And then collaborate on identifying solutions. There is one aspect of this which is very important to mention, and it has to do with the question of caring, but it also has to do with our lifestyles. And I just want to add, I know that caring is an important aspect of Ubuntu. And it was, you know, Ubuntu is something that you all are familiar with. But it's also in the context of just and sustainable development. It's a driving force for what changes and influences our priorities and the way we do things. Gaining skills and knowledge for employment, for economic advancement, is essential. We need that, right? Nobody wants to be without a job or see a country go to pieces because it doesn't have any development economically. But we also need to tackle the prejudice and the intolerance and the root cause of the 3 triple planetary crises. How many of you are students here? Anyone? No students. How many of you are teachers? Professors? Yeah? Have you heard of the 3 planetary crises? It says on the sign here, the slide, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. But what's the root cause? Patterns of consumption. It's our overconsumption, right? And that's when all the Africans and all the Indians said, no, 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 no. We have poverty. We have problems. We are not the ones. It's the people in the north and the people in the west that are over-consuming. And yes, that's true. Norway, my country, stands on the top. But I hate to disappoint you. Have you heard of the model about overshoot days? Yes? No? No. Overshoot days is a model that says, if we all had just one planet, and we only have one planet, and the resources on that planet, and we divide that by the amount of resources that each country uses, and there's a very specific, detailed way of doing that. When would we have used up that part of the resources of the planet that would be our share? Yep, Norway was pretty bad. 1st of April, we'd used up all of our share. So everything we do after the 1st of April is using resources that the earth does not have for us. What about South Africa? You're using resources that the planet does not have. 1st of June was the overshoot day for South Africa. So actually, we need to balance our consumption so that even South Africa isn't using up more of its resources than it has a right to do. And the other side of this is that 80% of all deaths are caused by lifestyle-related sicknesses. So what do? How does education help us attack these things? You know what they are? Anybody have an idea? They're neurons. They're the things inside our head that form the habits that we have. You know, I love taking, a car, driving here, having a nice meal. They're patterns that I would very much not like to give up. But as Tim Jackson, who's quite a well-known economic professor at the University of Surrey, says, there's something called consumer lock-in. It's not just that we are not very smart or we don't have a strong will. We just, we say we're going to go on a diet and we don't, or we say we're going to stop eating chocolate and we don't. It's because there is an architecture of incentive structures, advertisements, things like that, institutional barriers, inequality of access, restricted choice, but basically it's our habits, our routines, our social norms, and our expectations from the culture around us. There are a lot of reasons for this, and we could spend all afternoon looking at them. I don't have that much time in this presentation because I have a little folk tale I'd like to share with you at the end, if you're interested in that. But there are national priorities, economic ambitions that focus on competitiveness rather than collaboration, etc., etc. These are some, and I have even more here, that look at the teachers who don't feel that they are responsible to be active agents of co-creating new knowledge. They're sort of telling you, we know, we are, we're the bright ones, we're the educated ones, so you have to listen. No, the new form of quality education is going to be a form of sharing and collecting and finding new knowledge together. And of course, you've got the problem of how do you evaluate that kind of knowledge? I mean, I understand it's exam time, right? What kind of exams do we have? How do we measure this kind of knowledge that we need? The International Bureau of Education said that institutions of higher education, like the University of Fort Hare, need to change. Of course, I understand that the university here has done quite a lot to develop interdisciplinary activities, to do research that's focusing on issues that are very relevant for today. But the Bureau of Education says we need to be the eyes of society. See, doesn't like me, went away. There we go. The institutions of higher education need to be the ears of society, and that very much means citizen participation. That means talking to the person who does not read or write, who has never had a chance to go to school. I was talking to the taxi driver yesterday. Taxi drivers are the most exciting people. I'm not sure if you agree, but they have a good deal of wisdom. And he was saying, oh, never been to school, never learned to read or write. But he had very interesting insight on the politics of your country, on the way things were happening, on education. I learned a lot from him. The mind of society, the importance of universities and schools being a place where you can question, not just listen. And then, of course, the conscious of society, because we have to bring ethics and morals back into this equation. And perhaps the heart. I don't know how many universities actually focus on spiritual reflections and caring. Some are beginning to do so. But these are similes, eyes, ears. A university is not made of an eye, an ear, and a heart. It's a building, it's people. And here I'd like to get a little practical. One is assuring access. This was part of Target 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Equal access for all women and men to affordable doesn't mean you have to pay it through your nose, affordable education, both technical, vocational, tertiary, including university. South Africa has a lot of private schools, doesn't it? Yeah. There are a lot of places in the world, especially in Asia, but in particular Africa south of the Sahara, where you have non-state actors providing education. And the quality of that varies. I was reading on the plane a book that was written a long time ago, but it was almost a kind of Charles Dickensian description of private schools where the main goal was to get money. The fees was the important thing. And in Norway, we've had that problem with our kindergartens because we've let non-state actors take over the kindergartens. And they've come in and they said, oh, yeah, well, we're taking care of these wonderful preschool kids. But they've actually been gaining much more money than they have been using. And this is something the government has had to go in. The Abidjan Principles, if you're not familiar with them, gives a guideline for how non-state actors should provide education. So this is a valuable document which has been approved by countries all around the world and is only now being implemented, worth noting. But then on higher education, it was mentioned by the dean earlier about the importance of including people from all backgrounds, but it's not so easy. What kind of qualifications do they have? And here we have the Global Convention on Recognition of Qualifications. And one of the interesting things is, I don't know how many refugees you have in this community. I know that where I live, we actually have quite a number, especially now from Ukraine, from Somalia, from other places, Sudan. And many of them have nothing. You know, the refugees cannot prove that they've been to school, to university or anything. How do you give them access to further their education or to teach? These are things which are taken up in the guidelines there. Reorienting the role of science. This may not be of interest to all of you, but I think it's important for us to. You know, when I first came to university, you know what I heard? Someone said to me, "Oh, what are you going to do your doctorate on?" And I said, "Well, what doctorates have been done here?" "Yes, well, Dr. So-and-so, he just did his doctorate on pornographic images in China in the 2000 before Christ." Pornographic images in Chinese literature before Christ? I mean, I'm sorry, I don't really see how that's going to help the world. And the interesting thing is that more and more of science has turned to becoming science that will help and be beneficial to society and to the planet. And this is one of the basic needs that we have to address. We have to make sure that science today will provide evidence for the problems, for suggestions for the future, and we'll look not only at immediate situations, but how we can deal with tomorrow, how we can, survive these changes in climate, these differences in the way we live together. Again, I could talk a long time. There's something called sustainability science. Anybody heard of that? Has anyone here taken any sustainability science courses? Well, there's sustainability science, which is about what is sustainable development, and then you have sustainability science, which is for sustainable development. And those are two different things, and it's worth, noticing the difference. And the first one can take place in any course, in any discipline. The second one is often something which is more specific, as we were saying, modules, courses, etc. But the important thing is that it's a bridge between society and science, between knowledge and action, between going out and using the science in the field. This is one of my hobby horses, my babies. I have long been interested in global citizenship. And people would look at me and they said, no, 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 no. We cannot be global citizens because we are Norwegian citizens, we are American citizens, we are South African citizens first. Sure, that's not the point. With global citizenship education, one learns how we are part of one family with our diverse, distinctive ways of being and living. And that we have to act responsibly for our local community, but also for the global community. Have you ever juggled? Anybody juggle? You know how to juggle with 3 apples or 3 oranges? It's not so easy, but if you can keep at least 2 apples going, or 2 thoughts in your head at the same time, then global citizenship is not so difficult, because we're thinking locally, we're thinking globally, we're acting locally, and sometimes we're even acting globally. I won't go into more detail, but I don't think you have many courses on global citizenship here, have you? Not yet, but perhaps you will. The next thing I want to share with you is about community collaboration. The future we want is a part of the founding documents that led to Agenda 2030, and it says that participatory decision-making, that means that all of you are a part of that. It's kind of boring sometimes, but being able to consult, learning how to talk together, and how to have what they call social learning, where we learn together to find solutions. That is what achieving and planning a sustainable future is all about. And I have some examples down there: positive deviance, global adaptation, creative consultation. Those are just examples of models of community collaboration. I know there are many of them that have been going on here in South Africa. I'm looking forward to learning more about some of the projects that have been happening, where the local communities are working with the institutions of higher education to find new solutions. But it needs leadership. And leadership is not always very easy to find. Needs leadership in the family, needs leadership in the social club, needs leadership in the basketball court, needs leadership in the institutions of higher education. And it means that leadership isn't telling people what to do, it's bringing people together, providing space and time for people to find solutions. And as I mentioned here, attracting political support, funding, accountable and transparent, but most of all, developing trust. You know, I was asked if I could come here. I've never been to this university before. I've never been to this part of South Africa before. Been a lot of places. But I had to trust that you were not going to hijack me, kidnap me, bind me up, kill me, throw me out the window. And of course, trust on all levels is so key to what we're trying to do. This is what the Summit on Sustainable Development ended up with. These 4 things that they said we have to remember. They said, don't forget the importance of closing the value action gap. You know, we have to change systems, we also have to change the way we act, our personal habits. And we have to remember that even if we get inclusive quality education here, we also have to work on gender equality, we have to work on life under the seas, we have to work on all of the different issues that the Sustainable Development Goals work on. And we need for continuous collective learning, but we cannot forget the essential roles hope, commitment, and cooperation play. And I think, I'm closing now, but I think that perhaps we should keep in mind what Z.K. Matthews often referred to when I've read the writings that he has made. He spoke about education enabling people to become the best versions of themselves. We've heard that phrase before, becoming better versions of ourselves. But I would add to that that the people who go through new learning processes have to be standard bearers of a new civilization, one that is based on caring, consultation, and collaboration. And I think that perhaps I'll stop there. I have a little story to tell you, but maybe we take some questions first and I can say the story in the end, if that's okay. Then I'll thank you right for the moment and I'll be back with my story. Do you want me to go down or should I stay here?
Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together again for Professor Torresson for such an educative and insightful lecture. I was sitting there and thinking, the world of education and disciplines is actually collapsing on each other. Because if I were to be said to have an area, my area is environmental law. And so much of what was said today resonates with what I know from environmental law. Incidentally, I did my master's degree in environmental law in 2002 when Johannesburg hosted the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And so it took me back and started bringing me all this way. So much so that resonated with me. So personally, the lecture has been quite insightful and has reminded me of so many things that we tend to forget in our daily lives. Thank you so much, Professor Torresson. Thank you ever so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a moment or two to just engage with Professor Torresson. Comments, questions and answers. There are going to be roving mics. I've asked her to take a seat because we can give her a microphone. She's been standing for quite a while, if you don't mind. Prof, would you like to stand when you respond, or you can answer from where you are? It's still fine. Okay. And there will be roving mics around the room. So we'll just take a round or two of hands, and then after which we're going to ask Professor Torresson to come. I would really much want to hear the little story that you have for us. And then after that, we'll ask Professor Duku. Is she here? I haven't seen her. Is she here? Okay, there you are, Prof. Okay. So after that, I'll call you to come up and give concluding remarks, after which our DVC, Teaching and Learning, will give a vote of thanks and closure. So, ladies and gentlemen, you may indicate by raising your hand if you'd like to engage, to give a comment or a question, and then I'll note you. I'll take a round of hands, and then we'll see if we're going to have a second round. Can we have our first set of takers? Where are our microphones? Just indicate where you are. Okay, I see you there. Okay. Today I didn't forget my glasses, and I can't see anyone who's raised his hand. Anyone? Should I do it like, I was going to say going once, going twice. Professor Vital had a hand up. Maybe you can get the ball rolling, Prof. Then maybe others can come on board.
Professor Thoresen, thank you so much for that thought-provoking lecture. As you were speaking, I just wondered whether in this broad canvas that you've painted, who would have thought that in 2023, Europe, parts of Europe would be at war, and that we would have this terrible conflict in the Middle East of such terrible devastation and just carnage of humanity. How do you see us moving on the Sustainable Development Goals, on quality inclusive education in this context? Because there are very many pockets of conflicts. How do you see that relationship?
Thank you. That's a very relevant. I'm going to stand here so that I can see everyone.
Okay.
That's a very relevant and important question. And I tend to answer it with two comments. On the one hand, we have a media that provides us with information immediately, right? You know exactly when something happens. Did any of you hear about the Indian miners that got stuck in the cave, in the mining cave? We knew about the Chileans who were down there for ages, the Thai kids who got stuck in a cave. These sort of things are news we wouldn't have known about in the past, but we immediately know about what's happening everywhere. And if you look at statistics, we have fewer wars. Unfortunately, the recent wars are getting into a different kind of war. You're using drones and missiles in a way we haven't done before, but even the number of casualties are much less. I mean, what's happened in Sudan, what's happened in Yemen is actually far more than what has been happening in Gaza and in Ukraine. Well, maybe not Ukraine, but in Gaza at least. That's one thing. I tend to think that in this transition from collective youth to greater maturity, that we have to remember that in the large picture, we are moving away from wars, but that doesn't mean we don't have them, and it's not more difficult than it was. The other answer is, I've been a part of the activities at the United Nations for many years that have been working very determinedly to get rid of the veto power at the United Nations, to form a new kind of global government. And you're going to say, oh, she's a communist. Oof, nah, global government, dangerous, dangerous. We want South African government, we want Norwegian government. But what the United Nations is doing now, they have created what they call a pact for the future, and a very large majority of the countries at the United Nations have agreed that next year at the Summit for the Future, they will try to pass an agreement on changing the basic rules of the United Nations so that some of the issues, such as the veto power, where the United Nations has come again and again and said Russia cannot invade Ukraine, They said Israel has been too strong in terms of terrorists are not allowed to take hostages. You know, these things will be having much more force if they have the complete global support behind them. And whether or not that happens next year, I don't know. But at least they've been working on this consequently. They have concrete plans. They have gotten the major powers of the world together to agree on compromises that will enable this to happen. So I think there is hope for the future. There's also the possibility that Russia pushes the red button and we all blow up tomorrow, but I hope that doesn't happen, and I don't think it will. But I think we need to have a global forum where we can make decisions that will affect countries. We have that now with climate. And it's the Global Council on Climate Change that was meeting at the COP28 has actually made a number of steps forward, even though many of those countries involved have, on their own level, not lived up to their commitments, such as my own country. But I think we have to keep in mind that we need to keep working for that kind of global cooperation if we want to have a world where education and the Sustainable Development Goals can move forward. We have a blueprint, we have a roadmap, but we don't know the details. We have to build them as we go along.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other hands? There's a hand on my far right. To my far right, is there a mic going there as well?
Thank you.
We've got one mic. Okay, after you then, yeah, that's fine, Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. Let me congratulate you for the global citizenry work that you're doing. I think you very well articulated this notion of education being or even educators being the ear of society, eye of society, and you said the heart of society. I think one phenomenon, I think you did illustrate it in your slides, relates to the literacy and the illiteracy rate, and certainly it's quite prevalent in Africa. I think there was a study in South Africa that talks about the level at which we are, the differences between those who are literate, and there was that phenomenon, skillable, unskilled, and the unskillable and skilled people in South Africa. We went to those levels, but. Have you, in your study, have you identified, at least from the African context, whether we are progressing well in meeting the SDGs, right? It may have been nice and wonderful, to talk about the SDGs then, but have we made substantial progress? I can tell you, one of the one of the goals is to do away with pit toilets, but we still have them in some parts of South Africa. So within the context of education, do you think we've made substantial progress to the extent that we can say, look, we can rest? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Would you want to respond to this one, or we take both questions and then you respond?
I can respond to this one because I can go back to that slide.
To your slides, okay.
If that's okay. See if I can do that here. Sorry, this is called rewinding your mind. Oh yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
See if I can, there, nope, where did it go? No. Oh, sorry about that, we need to go further back. It's an important question. This is based on statistics. I have more statistics in my files with me if you're interested. But where we have made progress is child mortality, especially in Africa. Africa has reduced child mortality significantly, and actually almost achieved its goal there. But the goal was very small, and that doesn't mean that all child mortality is gone. I don't remember exact percentage for Africa. I have it in my files, but I do know that's one area that Africa has moved very much forward on. The other is, as I said, primary school enrollment. But the problem there is that we know from research that even though more children are going to school, more children are coming out as 10-year-olds without being able to read or write. Ending extreme poverty. This is one area where the SDG summit said that Africa has made great strides forward. But the point of departure, you know, the amount of poverty that has existed here has been so great that we still have enormous amount to go. And the interesting thing is that extreme poverty is growing in the urban areas in the rich countries. So that we have a question, and what is extreme poverty? They have different definitions of this, but oops, it's jumping all around here. So those are the areas where we've made progress. But at the other hand, pure poverty and hunger. Hunger has not been, it's actually not gone forward. We're at the same level we were for 4 years ago, before the COVID pandemic, in Africa and around the world. There, especially in India, has been a problem that they haven't been able to reduce the level of hunger. Maternal mortality, women who die under childbirth, it made a lot of progress before COVID. After COVID, it has stood still. Access to water and sanitation, again, we made wonderful strides the first few years of the Agenda 2030, and then it stopped up. Whether it was because of COVID, whether it's because of, you know, there are two things that have happened, and I won't talk a lot, but two things happened in connection with the COVID and the recent years. Governments have changed their funding for education, where the goal was between 3 to 6% of the national budgets for education. They have now changed that because the money is going to defenses, to military budgets. It's not saying that everybody's jumping out and going to war, but everybody's scared. And so even in my country now, you know, they've sort of wiped out the education budget, and it's all, we're buying new jets and we're buying new weapons, and it's frightening. We've moved backwards in protecting diversity, both environmental and human diversity. And this is based on human rights reports as well as on environmental reports. Vaccines for malaria and tetanus. We've come so far. You know, you don't have malaria here. You're lucky. I was living in Uganda. We had malaria all the time, and it's no fun. It's terrible. And children die every day of malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. And we'd come so far, but now we've moved backwards. The percentage of children who die of malaria, of people, has gone backwards. We've lost track. And the same thing with employment and urban slums in particular. That's just a general thing, and it doesn't say all the details about Africa, but there are, if you go on to sdg.com, the UN website, it gives you the lists and the percentages. There are wonderful websites with very detailed statistics from different parts of the world that explain to you how much we've moved forward, how much we've moved backward. And South Africa has been one of the countries that has actually contributed statistics to that. Whether or not these statistics are 100% reliable or not, that's for you to decide. I hope that answers some of your question.
Next question. Yes, you may come.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof, for the insightful presentation. I just have one question.
Yes.
And that relates to the actual roots of sustainable development. By whose lenses are we defining what is sustainable, number one? And by whose lenses are we defining development? I say this because for a very long time, Africa has played second fiddle. And I think once we address that, then even the allegory of moving from boyhood, teenage, the teenage phase into adulthood that you gave us would be easier for us to actually tell who actually defines what teenage is in terms of the development of nations, the inclusivity of education, who defines that, and whose values are we using? I say this because for a very long time, the values of Africa have been bastardized on the global scene. And it might look like there is consultation that happens, but time and time again, the African and Africa always play second fiddle. We are always following after what has already happened, what is acceptable as development, what is acceptable as even education itself. And that is usually to the detriment of our indigenous knowledges. So perhaps if you could iron that out for me, by whose lenses are we using? And once that has been done, I feel like even the literacy poverty that you were referring to, we can then iron that out. Because sometimes I feel like, and I think like, we tend to just look at the result, and yet sometimes the African child has been judged unfairly. The African child learns, if it's a Lusophone, a former Lusophone colony, they learn in Portuguese. If it's a former Anglo colony, they learn in English. And this is not their language. So are we not pushing curriculum violence in the name of inclusive education? Then we turn around and we then say, no, look at Africa. Africa is the third world. We even call it a third world. Moving from first world, we don't have a second. We push it to the third world. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, very important question. I tried it in my presentation to emphasize that this agenda, this program for global collaboration is based on a global perspective. Let me take first, the process of creating these goals was challenging, to say the least. And it was challenging because in these negotiations, in these meetings that were held every year for 10, 12, 15 years, you had representatives from all around the world. But to be honest, you couldn't hear the African voice that much. You heard actually the Latin American voice more than it's ever been heard before. You heard, of course, the voices of the major countries of the North and the West. But it was there. The African people were represented both in the civil society part and in the negotiations. But that's a challenge I would make to all of you now. If this is true, that sustainable development, and development, both the definition of development and of sustainability, is something we have to create as we're going along. And it has to be diverse understanding so that it fits the South African condition, as well as the Norwegian condition, as well as the other conditions, then you have to be a part of it. I'm not saying you all have to run and go, jump up and visit the United Nations and say, hey, I want to participate. But there are so many ways of influencing both the political and the civil society activities that are trying to define what this is. And by putting in the African perspective, the indigenous knowledge, and this is where education comes in. It's interesting. In Norway, we have lots of big mountains, lots of little valleys, and we all speak a different dialect in these valleys, and you cannot understand each other at all. It's not a completely different language, but, it's pretty hard. And we've had a battle going for years about whether we should have what they call bokmål, which is the Oslo language, for all of the country, or if we should let children learn through their native dialects. And we haven't solved that problem yet. And we have refugees. Should the Ukrainians learn in Ukrainian, or should they learn in Norwegian if they're going to be a part of the Norwegian society? Norwegian first, even though they don't understand a word. Tanzania had this problem, if you recall. When Tanzania was first established in the 60s, and in the 70s and the 80s, children went to school and had to learn English, and they didn't speak English. And didn't work until just recently that they've actually had university books and things in Swahili that they can use and not have to go back to other languages. So the questions of those kinds have to be decided upon in your community, in your government, in your, in collaboration. And we can, no one from outside can come in and say you have to do it this way or that way. But the larger issues, we all have to work on together, And I was very impressed by the fact that when Agenda 2030 was agreed upon, we said we throw out the old definitions of development. Economic progress is not going to save the world. We don't need a lifestyle where everyone has 2 cars, a fancy villa, a boat, a jet plane, and flies from one side of America to the other to buy a cup of coffee, which some people do. It isn't those kinds of development that are actual anymore. So to answer your question, Africa's voice needs to be heard more. The local voices need to be respected and involved more actively, but many of the issues of what kind of education and how have to be taken locally, and with the idea that we are a part of a global community. So it's, again, the juggling 2 things. Not so easy, but I think all of the young people here are much better at it than we old youths are. I don't have any doubt about that.
Okay. Thank you so very much. I was giving you the mic because there's a hand. And then you can just come and conclude. Let me do it this way. We'll take the next round of hands, and then once those are done, you then give us your story. I'm not going to come back here. And then after that, Professor Duku, you then come up front to do the concluding remarks, and DVC, you then come and give the vote of thanks and the closure after that. So thank you so much. My parting shot is, during my years of doing environmental law, we used to have this mantra, think globally, act locally. And I think it resonates a lot with your response just now. Because these things are so big that as an individual, you might actually be frightened out of your wits and say, what can I actually do? The climate catastrophe, as you've put it, the loss of biodiversity, air pollution, and we throw up our hands in the air. It looks like it's the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse coming for us, and there's nothing we can do. So this thinking globally and acting locally might be one of those solutions. Otherwise, thank you so very much, and thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much,
please,
Prof.
yeah. Questions?
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you for the presentation, which is so insightful and multidisciplinary in nature. Mine is just a comment, not a question. As an inclusive education person, I'm happy because you mentioned one aspect of the foundations of quality education. Well, we can say we can include them as tenets of inclusive quality education, because even if we can have ambiguous practical examples to sustainable development or to inclusivity, but if these foundations are lacking, then we will not be moving forward. Prof, you mentioned caring. Caring is one of the foundations if we want to achieve quality education. You mentioned, Prof, Ubuntu, the philosophy of Ubuntu, talking about trust and collaboration. Prof, you mentioned humanity. In humanity, Prof mentioned having solidarity with nature of other people. And I liked that a lot because we as Africans, we can say we have a lot of humanity, we have solidarity, natural in our upbringing, in our schooling system, maybe religion-wise, maybe culture-wise. So I was happy that Prof mentioned that aspect as the foundation. If we don't have that aspect, the foundation is weak. Thank you, Prof.
There's a question in the back, or a comment in the back.
Thank you very much, Prof. I want to know, I'm an education student here at the University of Fort Hare. I want to know, Prof, as we know that sustainable development, it's a combination of two words, and the same sustainable development have goals to reach that hoped to be reached by the year 2030, which might be 5 or 6 years to reach 2030 by now. Now, in my own observation, it's still far for African countries, including my own country, to reach or fulfill the goals, which are sustainable development goals. Now, I just want to know one thing. In this combination of these two words, what could be the problem? Is it sustainability, or the problem is development for the SDGs not to be reached? And in your own view, is it still possible, or is it possible from now to 2020 for some of the goals to be fulfilled? That's only I want to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a prophet. I don't want you to quote me. I think it is a big challenge ahead of us still. I don't think it's impossible that we can achieve many of the goals. An example, I was in East Africa when the goals were publicized in 2015. And a country that has also suffered very greatly, Rwanda, decided within the first year to ban all plastic bags, all plastic cups, all plastic everything. Within 1 year, nobody, and you were checked at the airport. You could not walk into that country with a plastic bag or a plastic cup or a plastic knife or a plastic fork. And in one swoop, they managed to, avoid the problem I see here on the sides of the road with, plastic bags all over the place. And, there are things that can be done quickly. One can say that, one can have governmental decisions. Teachers can suddenly move from lecturing to involving the students in finding solutions in the local communities. But I don't think we're going to get all the goals, no. Unfortunately, there's no way. We're so far behind. But that doesn't mean we should stop. Because if these goals have any value, then we have to keep on afterwards working on them. If we don't want pit latrines where kids fall down and die, or schools without toilets for the girls so that they can go and feel safe, then we have to keep on working for that. And these goals are things that the communities that you all have contributed, saying this is important, we need that. So whether or not we succeed, we need to keep on working. And I think that at least as that sign showed, Pakwa Chingula, we know which direction we want to go. We want to help each other, we want to work together, and we want to convince our children and our students and our friends and our neighbors and our family that we cannot fight. We have to find ways of collaborating and working together and learning together. I don't know if that answers your question, or at least it's my view. Okay, folks, would you like a little folk tale? I know you're hungry, the food's waiting for you. It's been a long session. I admire your patience, really I do. But once upon a time, not too long ago, can you hear me, all of you? Once upon a time, not too long ago, the god of greed, Mammon, the god of greed, he invited the giraffe, the jackal, the spider, and the monkey to visit him. He promised them magnificent rewards if they would bring him the treasures of the earth. He asked the giraffe to go and collect all the fruits and vegetables, the herbs and trees, The jackal was ordered to collect the meat and the fur and the bones and the horns of the animals. The spider was told to go into the heart of the earth and collect the gems and the minerals and bring them back. And the monkey, he was directed to round up all the human resources that he could. After carrying out their tasks, the animals came back and were very excited about getting what they had been promised, magnificent rewards. You, giraffe, Mammon said, you will be lord of the fields and the forests. The giraffe was delighted. Oh, just look at me, I'm the lord of the fields and the forests. And he turned around, but all he could see was desert and asphalt. You, jackal, Mammon said, you will be commander of all the fauna. And the jackal raised his snout very proudly and turned around to look at his empire. And he discovered there were not very many animals left. Most of the species had become extinct. The spider, you will be master of all that has been constructed of the minerals of the earth. And when the spider turned to gloat over his empire, he saw floods and storms tearing down buildings everywhere. And finally, monkey, you did such a good job, said Mammon. He said, you brought rich and poor, people from the city, people from the countryside together. You will get a great reward. You will have the position of overseeing the ambitions of all people. And the monkey thought, look at me. I have the power to make people happy and contented. But when he turned around, all he could see was wars and conflict. Later in the day, the giraffe, the jackal, the spider, and the monkey gathered together under the baobab tree. They were going to discuss their disappointments. We sought magnificent rewards, and all we got was dismal devastation. They cried. The others nodded in agreement. What are we going to do? On a branch of the baobab tree was a big, colorful bird. The bird said, you didn't know, did you? The jackal looked up and said, what? You didn't know that Mammon was blind? He cannot foresee anything. He doesn't understand the consequences of anything. He lacks foresight and never considers the future. So what are we to do? The monkey cried. This is not good. And the bird turned around and he said, there is one enemy that Mammon has. Mammon's enemy is the spirit of generosity and collaboration. Serving that spirit can give you the opportunity to get genuinely magnificent, though maybe not material, rewards. How on earth do we find that spirit? Cried the giraffe. Flapping his wings, the bird called out as he rose, search for that spirit. It's not easy to find among the conflict and the tumult in the world today, but it's there. It is there, and it will bring you rewards. And with that, the bird flew off in a bright flash of color, and the animals began their search. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Molweni, all protocols observed. Yes, I can actually I'm almost salivating. Amongst one of the beliefs of Professor Z.K. Matthews was to believe that, thank you, was that a classroom, the role of a classroom is not only to promote academic excellence, but the classroom was also a site where frameworks for humanizing the space were debated upon and values encouraged. Professor Mncube, where to from here? I believe that fortunately this is a decade of renewal in the University of Fort Hare, and we're trying as a Faculty of Education to be impactful. But I think this lecture today is not giving us any answers, but it is raising a lot of questions. A lot of questions about our role in education for the Sustainable Development Goals. I think today's lecture is actually raising some questions regarding the journey as a third world country, the journey towards a sustainable development through inclusive education. And I think the issue is that I think we need to debate, discuss, and find new lenses. As we do that in the context of global and local violence. How do we promote inclusive education in the context of violence? By the global as well as by the local. And I think as Professor Mncube unpacked inclusive education, that amongst others, as educators, we have, if they cannot learn the way we teach, then we teach them the way they learn. However, we still living in a very violent context. We are violent against one another. We are violent towards others. We are violent towards things, towards plant, towards the climate, towards the environment. And as I was seated there, I am also confident, Professor Mncube and the colleagues in the Faculty of Education, that indeed there is an appetite for the book series on inclusive education. But I think the question is, what will be the issues that the book series would be unpacking? What is it that the book series will be talking to that is not already there? And I think part of the Faculty of Education sitting down to say, as we are aspiring to be an impactful faculty within the communities as well as within the Eastern Cape and the globe, we need to begin to define who we are. Because I believe as we unpack the complexity of inclusive education, the complexity of inclusive education actually also resides with who we are, or who we think we are, and who they say we are. There's a lot of violence, political violence, social violence, economic violence, spiritual violence, intellectual violence. How do we begin to be impactful as the Faculty of Education in the new discourse of inclusive education? Also, as the Faculty of Education, I am also encouraged this afternoon that our educational climate research, there is an appetite for that. But what are the issues that as a Faculty of Education we shall be addressing in that research on climate education research? How do we reorganize? How do we relearn? How do we unlearn other issues so that we are peaceful, not only towards the self, towards each other, but also the planet? Yes, as the Faculty of Education, I believe this afternoon we have been encouraged, but also challenged, so as to position ourselves as an impactful faculty. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you. It's my very pleasant task to do the vote of thanks. Let me start with the Faculty of Education. Thank you, Prof. Nube, for hosting this ZK Matthew lecture. I think we've had a wonderful 2 hours or so of really reflecting and thinking about some very important and key issues that touches all our lives. I want to, in particular, thank the Matthews and Bokwe family for being with us. Thank you very much for your presence. And I want to especially thank Prof. Teresen for her talk. The topic, I think, learning to live together, I think speaks exactly to what Prof. Duku was saying. How do we overcome violence? How do we overcome conflicts? It is about learning to live together. And I think the talk helped us to understand how inclusive quality education could be one key means for learning to live together. I especially appreciated in your talk, Prof. Teresen, the way you wove together our own history, the South African Freedom Charter with the Sustainable Development Goals, and also with how those contribute and are linked to quality, inclusive education for all. There were many concepts that you touched on, like transformative learning. In South Africa, we talk a lot about transformation. And what is transformation? Curricula, in terms of curricula, in terms of how we live, just in terms of so many things. And I think you forced us to think about this anew. Certainly, there are new learning processes we are all going to encounter into the future. And it's going to become more and more important that learning how to learn is going to be an ongoing challenge for all of us, young and old. I also appreciated a very specific role you gave to us in higher education to be the eyes, the ears, the mind, and the conscience of society. So the many, many things that you have touched on, a very broad range of ideas and concepts, ended very well in your story, and in which you make us really think about how important generosity and collaboration is, and that those are going to be important into the future to overcome the conflicts and all the negative things that we experience. And I think you end on giving us real hope that we have it all within ourselves to be those good things. So I thank you for a very insightful, thought-provoking talk and a wonderful set of questions and conversation that came out of that. And then, of course, to thank the people who make an event like this happen, the institutional advancement and our ICT division and all the support staff who are in the background and make sure we all enjoy the event and things go as planned. So thank you very much to all the staff. And I'm really glad that there are also students here listening and thinking about these future aspects that we might be here, but this local is very much linked to the global. And what each of us do in our little corners, our little spaces, does impact the large whole. So thank you for that. Then, Program Director, thank you very much for leading us through today. And let me not then forget TVC, Research, Partnerships and Innovation. Thank you very much for your leadership in setting this up. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the event.
So, Professor Torreson, this has been done by one of our students in the Department of Arts. And it's our little something to say how grateful we are that you could make it. I remember when we met, it was on the 23rd of September when we met in Hamar in Norway, and you had given a brilliant talk, and when we talked to the Dean about having you here just to also contribute towards the Z.K. Matthews lecture, you gladly accepted. And we as the university would like to say thank you very much, and don't worry about how it will get there. We will make sure it gets there. I know you're probably saying, how will I carry this thing? Thank you so much again to the student who did this, and we really would like to say thank you very much. We hope this is the beginning of a long relationship between ourselves and you. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much. This is one of the most surprising gifts I've ever gotten. Please thank again the artist very much, and thank you all for inviting me. It's been a delight so far, and I also look forward to closer continued contact.
With a picture.
Thank you so much, Prof. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, let me announce that please don't leave without actually indulging in whatever has been served over there. Let me take the opportunity to thank all of you colleagues, all of you. We were not sure whether we're going to have this hall full, but we are really excited and delighted that you're honored and be here. All staff, all students, and everyone, thank you very, very much.
I know I promised that I wouldn't come back, so I'm wearing a different hat. So as we are about to get the refreshments, Uza Singa Gilani, and just to have some semblance of order, may I request that we allow these two tables in front to go first, and then once they have been served, the two tables to my right go, and then we continue in that order, because we are many. Can we allow these two tables here to go first, and then we can follow each other in that order? Thank you so much.